If you've ever seen guys in puffy pantaloons and striped tunics holding spears like they're extras in a Shakespeare play, standing around outside the Vatican while tourists take pictures with them, they kind of look like a theme park attraction. They look like someone asked an Italian Renaissance painter to design a Halloween costume. They look like the least threatening security detail on the planet. These guys don't just carry halberds and spears, they have Glocks tucked under their robes. They complete Swiss Army basic training. They're trained in counterterrorism and close protection. They're sworn in on a ceremony held on the anniversary of the day 147 of their predecessors bled out on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica to give their lives for the Pope without question, without hesitation. This oath is not just something that's spoken. This has been paid for with blood, with halberds, against 20,000 unpaid mercenaries who are somehow convinced that the Pope was the Antichrist. This episode, we're going to talk about the oldest continuous operating military unit in the world. 519 years of continuous, regular service. I have a hard time believing these guys are even real. The Pope? How many divisions does he have? That was Joseph Stalin. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. Starting off with a quote from Stalin, not really my style, as we probably know, because I am, again, no friend of communists or communism in general. Anyway, to understand why the Pope has the Swiss Guard as bodyguards, we need to understand a few things before we go too far. Switzerland in the 15th century and what Rome in the 15th century are not what they are now. Switzerland in the 1400s and 1500s was essentially running a professional mercenary exportation business, and they were really, really good at it. Swiss infantry had spent the previous about 100 years proving themselves to be some of the finest soldiers in all of mainland Europe. They repeatedly destroyed mounted knights across the continent like it was nothing, like they were just punching into work. At the Battle of Merton in 1476 and the Battle of Nancy in 1477, Swiss pike formations destroyed the army of Charles the Bold of Burgundy, which is in France, who was widely considered the most powerful military force in all of Western Europe at the time. The Swiss didn't win by having better technology or more men. They won through discipline, better formations and fighting skills, and the specific kind of controlled aggression that comes from years of drilling together as a unit and basically being not a military organization, but a military organism. They were a hive mind, kind of. Every major power in Europe wanted Swiss soldiers. France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, they all competed pretty aggressively for Swiss mercenary contracts. The Swiss were a premium product, and they knew they were a premium product, just like their chocolate and their watches, because Swiss watches are fantastic. Chocolate in general is very, very good. Swiss chocolate, on the other hand, is like otherworldly. And if you need any further proof, ask the Miss, the hot chocolate lady. She's very, very good. Rome at the time was a total war zone, disguised as the Holy City. The Italian peninsula was a collection of competing city-states that are always in some kind of like low-grade conflict with each other, and with whatever foreign power happened to be interested in Italy that decade, which was usually France, Spain, again, the Holy Roman Empire, all simultaneously. All of them had decided that Italy was worth fighting over, and none of them agreed that they could just take turns owning Italy. Um, and the Pope is not just a spiritual leader, he was actually the head of state with territory to defend, enemies who wanted him dead or captured, and a need for military force that wouldn't bring someone else's politics and agenda to the doorstep of the Vatican with it. The last part of that is the key. The Pope couldn't hire French soldiers without being accused of favoring the French or being a puppet for the French monarchy. He couldn't hire the Spanish without facing the same issues, but just in a different language. Italian mercenaries, who were the condottieri, are expensive, unreliable, and very regularly played both sides of a conflict at the same time. Sounds like another family that we might talk about at some point in time. And hopefully I don't end up chained to a tree, shot in the back twice, and have it ruled a suicide. Anyway, the Rothschilds are interesting. The Pope needed soldiers who were loyal only to him. And he wanted them from a place that had no territorial ambitions in Italy, with no political allegiance to anyone of any of these other competing powers, with a very documented, proven track record for being the best in the business. So when you need someone who's good at what they do and has no political agenda and is neutral, you go to Switzerland. I mean, nowadays, their citizenry is like, hey, here's a rifle. We're neutral and we would like to keep it that way. Switzerland has like some of the best gun laws in Europe. I believe Poland has really, really decent ones too if you're a gun owner. But Switzerland is like, you can just go buy a semi-automatic rifle. Like, I'm sure there's background checks and probably training courses you have to do, but you can do it. I mean, you can just go get a rifle or a pistol and be fine in Switzerland, because Switzerland, again, is excellent. Pope Julius II was the man who made all of this official. Julius is one of those popes who gave like the institution a pretty colorful reputation. I love this term. He was called the warrior pope because he literally wore armor and led military campaigns himself, occasionally cussing out his generals when they underperformed. He was also the patron who commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling and Raphael to decorate the Vatican apartments, which makes him arguably the single most important art patron of the Italian Renaissance. I'm not sure what the other two Ninja Turtles were doing during all of this, but he was keeping at least two of them busy. You know, the two that arguably needed to be kept busy, because one had ADHD and the other one had anger issues. And that's why they had the weapons that they were given, because the guy with ADHD needed something that you have to focus to use well without hurting yourself. And the one with rage and anger issues was given weapons that are essentially defensive. Ninja Turtle lore is awesome. He was a warrior, a politician, and a cultural visionary who's also deeply paranoid about his personal security in a way that is entirely rational because of the political environment of Rome in the early 1500s. In September of 1505, a contingent of 105 Swiss soldiers under the command of Caspar von Selenin left Switzerland on foot and marched to Rome. They walked from Switzerland to Italy, which is a challenge, I would say. January 22nd, 1506, they entered Rome through the Porta del Popolo and made their way to the Vatican. Julius II himself greeted them at St. Peter's Basilica, which is accepting them into papal service and giving them the title Defenders of the Church's Freedom. 150 men. The same number, roughly, that guards the Pope today. The date of January 22nd, 1506 is the official founding date of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. 519 years ago, and they are still there. For the first 20-ish years of the Guard's existence, they were doing like regular military work. They're not doing ceremonial standing around and bodyguarding. They're actually going out on campaigns. Italy was in the middle of the Italian Wars, which is a multi-decade conflict involving France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the people that I'm going to keep talking about through this whole thing. Every Italian city-state and any various number of combinations, everybody wants to fight, everybody wants Rome. But so does the Pope. And he's not just going to turn the other cheek and roll over and let them take it. The whole turn the other cheek thing is not something he wants to do, which, you know, and I know people will be like, well, what about thou shalt not kill? The context is thou shalt not murder, not thou shalt not kill in combat if needed. Just saying, that's why the Crusades were justifiable. That and, I don't know, 700 to 800 years of being invaded and pillaged and raped and murdered in their own homes and the streets of their cities. So, yeah, people might be upset with that I can justify some of the Crusades, but they were needed. And who knows if if they hadn't happened, if these guys had not decided to fight back, what would have happened? So we have all these different places fighting over this one little spot in Italy. The Papal States were directly involved, which meant that the Swiss Guard were operating as an actual military force, and again, not a security detail. Pope Clement VII, who took over in 1523, was a member of the Medici family. Very sophisticated, cultured, politically connected and complex, and it would turn out like apocalyptically bad at picking which side of things to be on. The dominant political force in Europe was the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who controlled Spain, the Low Countries, large chunks of Germany, and throughout Spain, significant chunks of Germany, and because he also controlled parts of Spain, was incredibly wealthy because of all of the money flowing in from the Americas. Because this is when the Spanish were out discovering South and Central America and parts of North America. And if you didn't catch the air quotes when I said discovering, I mean, there's a reason that they don't speak like Mayan or Aztec or Incan or any of that stuff anymore. So, so he's not a guy that you want on the opposite side of the table from you. You want to be his buddy. Clement looked at Charles V's like growing power and decides to join a coalition against him called the League of Cognac. So this is an alliance with France and several of these other Italian city-states that were all fighting over Rome. It was designed to kind of put Charles in check a little bit. He did this without considering what Charles's army might want to do in response. Charles's army, by 1527, was a catastrophe, just waiting for a direction to be pointed in. It consisted of about 14,000 German soldiers, mostly Landsknechts, which, oh boy, wow, you want to talk about a military unit with some history and some violence in them? The Landsknechts were definitely one of them. A lot of these guys were Lutheran converts who had developed a theology of hatred towards the Pope and everything that the Catholic Church represented, and about 6,000 Spanish soldiers, which were equally brutal and equally unpaid. The commander, the Duke of Bourbon, was trying to channel their rage and hunger for something into a force that he could control. And he, as it turns out...
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
He had no control at all over them. He wrote to Clement before the attack with words that might amount to, like, I can't stop what's coming. And he was not at all wrong about that. Charles V himself reportedly didn't want Rome sacked because he was still a Catholic. He understood that attacking the Vatican and the Papal States in general would be a political and religious nightmare, because attacking the seat of the church is going to create a problem. you know? But when you have 20,000 men that are not paid and they're expected to go fight and they want to go fight, and they think now, because of their conversion to Lutheranism, that the Pope is the Antichrist. And they can see that Rome is chock-a-block full of treasure and gold. And what the emperor wants becomes largely irrelevant to what they are going to do. So the army moves south. Clement's defenses were a disaster in their own right. He had recently sent most of his mercenary forces home because he couldn't pay them. The remaining military garrison was a militia of about 5,000 men of questionable quality and loyalty, and the Swiss Guard, who numbered 189 men, 189 in the service of heaven. Oh, God, we get to do another Sabaton song. It's almost like I planned that. What the f*** am I doing with my life? The Imperial Army arrived at the walls of Rome on the night of May 5th, and the assault would begin in the pre-dawn hours of May 6th. The Duke of Bourbon was shot in the first moments of the attack. Artist and goldsmith Beneviento Cellini was actually there during this and later claimed in his autobiography that he personally fired the shot, which a lot of historians consider like promotional mythology, we'll call it. Which was, and they do this because that was like completely unverifiable, because nobody else saw the shot that was fired that killed him, but he did. And he's the only one claiming to have taken the shot that killed him. But who knows? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Bourbon's death at the moment of the assault removed the one commander who might have had some type or level of restraint on what was about to follow. After that, the army had no leadership to speak of, which made them even more dangerous, because you have 20,000 men that think that this one guy is Satan, basically, and they want him dead. 20,000 is a much larger number than 189. Like, there's a comma in it, okay? There's not that in 189. It's very much not an even fight. But this essentially organized rabble don't realize that they're coming up against the best trained military force on the continent. You know what? Maybe on the planet, we'll say, at the time. The walls were breached almost immediately and the city falls. The Landsknecht poured in through the gates, motivated by a theological hatred for the Pope that went beyond politics into full-blown religious fervor. These men, honestly, again, believe that the Pope is the Antichrist. It's not a figure of speech. That's their actual position. They stabbed horses inside of St. Peter's Basilica. They dressed in stolen papal vestments and held ceremonies mocking Catholic rituals in the streets. They broke open the tombs of previous popes and desecrated the remains, which that's not the last time. That's not the last time we're going to talk about the desecrated remains of a pope on this show, because I've got another story. It might end up being a Patreon episode. Patreon.com/1159media. Some accounts say they demanded to elect Martin Luther as the new pope, which I'm not sure how that would work, because he's, like the Lutheran, and popes are pretty strictly Catholic, Martin Luther himself, when news of the sack reached him in Germany, was horrified that all of this was being done in his name. He said what happened went well beyond anything he had intended or wanted it to do. Because yes, they have their differences, but he's still not someone who would condone the wholesale murder of people in general. And he doesn't want it being done in his name. Matter of fact, if you want to learn a little bit more about Martin Luther, you can go over and check out the episode of the Remedial Scholar podcast with Levi. He had me on episode 49 of his show. where we talked about the Munster Rebellion, which was all Lutherans. And it was so much fun. It was a really good episode. Actually, I should get a hold of him and see if I can borrow that episode to pair with this one because they work really well together. Oh, hey, didn't see you there. I'm editing. I mentioned wanting to get a hold of Levi from the Remedial Scholar podcast to borrow episode 49 from him of the Munster Rebellion. I talked to him, and after much negotiation and bargaining, no, I'm just kidding. He's a great dude. He actually sent me a file for that episode. So you're going to get this episode, and you're also going to get episode 49 of the Remedial Scholar podcast that I went on with Levi with. And I'm going to put that out with it because I think that the two pair really well together. Like I said, I know I just heard myself say that. It's crazy. But that means that you're going to get two episodes technically, one of mine, one of Levi's, and hey, go check out his show while you're at it. He does a bunch of awesome stuff there. I highly recommend it if you're into history, because you're here. You'll like it. So let's get back to the show. Fizzle out. Whatever. Bye. So not wanting the papacy destroyed is a pretty interesting statement coming from a man that started what's essentially the Protestant Reformation. That was, and all of this is being done in his name to the seat of the church he had broken away from, and it was still too much for him. The Spanish soldiers matched the Germans in brutality without any theological motivation. Rome has no effective defense. From the very beginning of this until the end, we are talking about a complete massacre. They went in there with the intention of killing everything. In the Vatican, Pope Clement had been doing mass when the news reached him. The imperial forces are already in the city walls. The streets around Borgo, which is the neighborhood directly adjacent to the Vatican, are filling with soldiers as the Pope is attending services. The window for escape is slamming shut while the Pope is doing this. Captain Kaspar Royst, who is the captain commanding the Swiss Guard, makes the only actual decision available for him to make. He divides his forces. 42 guards would be sent directly to escort the Pope. The other 147 are going to be sent to hold this force off. The escape route was the Passetto di Borgo, an 800-meter elevated covered corridor built into the top of the Leonin Wall, which connected the Vatican to Castel San Angelo. The Passetto had been built in the 9th century specifically as an escape route for the Pope, which was basically the medieval equivalent of a panic room. But instead of being a panic room or an easy way to get away from people, it's a tunnel in the sky running along the top of a fortified wall, which is invisible from the streets below. Which is probably a good thing that you can't see this from the streets below, because then it wouldn't be an invisible tunnel in the sky. If Clement could reach it and make it through, he would reach Castel San Angelo, which is the circular fortress originally built as a mausoleum of Emperor Hadrian and converted over centuries into a heavily fortified refuge. Hadrian, also of the Wall fame, which Roman soldiers... which Scottish soldiers and Romans alike, once Hadrian's Wall was built, did the most military thing ever and drew dicks on it. Because it doesn't matter what time people are serving in the military, it's still dudes that are going to do dude shit. And drawing dicks on stuff is hilarious. Maybe not for the women out there, but the guys, we like drawing dicks on stuff because it's fun. I'm surprised they don't have one on my whiteboard right now. Adds drawing dick on whiteboard to grocery list. So if he makes it inside the walls of Castel San Angelo, he's going to be safe. Everything here depends on buying him enough time to get there. And that's where the rest of our guys come in. The Passetto is still there today. So that'll tell you how this story ends. Oh, and the Pope is still around today, and he still lives in the Vatican, which is still in Rome. So, spoiler alert, you can still walk through the Pasetto as a tourist today. You can walk the exact path that the Pope sprinted through in his white vestment while 147 men died behind him to buy him the time that he needed to get to safety. The 147 moved to the steps of St. Peter's Basilica and the Teutonic Cemetery nearby, and they held it. They fought with halberds and swords against an army with aquaribuses and cannons, which aquaribuses were like super, super primitive guns. It was basically a small cannon on a wooden frame with a wick and everything, and you had to pull the trigger, which would lower the wick in, light the powder, and you'd hold it. I'm sorry, it's arquebus is how I should have pronounced that, but I'm retarded. But yeah, it's basically a small cannon that you would just hold, and you'd have to hold it still while it fired. I'd be curious to see the recoil on that, because I mean, if you've ever seen a cannon fire, they will move because they're on wheels. I don't know what that would be like to hold on to one of those. Ooh, I need to go to more medieval stuff. They were killed almost to a man. Royce himself was wounded in the fighting, and somehow, divine intervention, let's call it in this case, made it to his home nearby looking for shelter and was found there by Spanish soldiers and killed in front of his wife, Elizabeth. The 42 men tasked with protecting the Pope all make it into the Pasetto. Pope Clement ran as hard as he could, and he's still in his full Pope regalia, the white vestments. The hat may have blown off, we don't know. And as he ran, there are some reports that villagers, locals in the area, were throwing cloaks and food down to him to try to help change his appearance. They're trying to protect the Pope while the city burns. He made it to Castel San Angelo. The iron doors are now sealed behind him. The 42 survivors held the entrance until the Pope was safe inside. So I would imagine we've already split the forces once here. We don't really know, do they split them even further once they get into the Pasetto? Do you have enough men for a couple of ranks to block the entire pathway? Well, a few more of them go on with the Pope to protect him in case something happens? Or do you just get in there and be like, run, we're staying here? I don't really know. But what follows all of this is one of the worst events in the history of all of European civilization. The sack of Rome lasted for months. The Landsknechts, again, are in the city. They've stabled their horses in St. Peter's Basilica at this time. They're desecrating tombs. They broke open, after all of this, they broke open the grave of Julius II, who was the man that actually founded the Swiss Guard as bodyguards for the Pope. The death toll reached about 12,000 people. During the sack of Rome, the population dropped from about 54,000 down to a conservative estimate of 11,000 people. The majority of Renaissance-era Rome's art and treasures are either stolen or destroyed. The golden age of the Italian Renaissance centered on Rome, and it effectively ended May 6th, 1527. And here's the part that I want you to hold on to, because this is like the contrast that defines the entire story. Clement sat inside Castel San Angelo for months while his city was destroyed and his people were killed. He eventually has to agree to terms. He has to come up with a payment of 400,000 ducats and has to give up some territory that he didn't want to. When he finally escaped, it was disguised as a servant, which, depending on how Catholic you want to get about it, he's already a servant of God, but now he's disguised as a servant of men. And he's sneaking out in a disguise and slipping away into the dark. The man who held the seat of the most powerful religious institution in the Western world snuck out of Rome dressed as a butler, basically. The 147 who died on the steps died magnificently. These guys paid the ultimate price, and the Pope got to escape. I don't know how you want to feel about that. I'm sure I have people out there that'd be like, it's awful that these guys had to die to keep the Pope alive, and that's not fair. And I'm sure there's also people out there that are like, yeah, you know? I kind of fall personally in the middle a bit, but closer to the fuck yeah side of it, you know? January 22nd is the founding date of the Guard, and that is celebrated every year. May 6th is the date that every new Swiss Guard recruit swears their oath of loyalty. And again, not a random date. That's the anniversary of the morning that those 147 men decided that the Pope's life was worth all of theirs individually, and they proved it. The oath that these recruits swear explicitly says that, quote, they will sacrifice, if necessary, their life in defense of the Pope. Not to protect, not to serve, to sacrifice their life to defend the Pope. Every recruit who raises 3 fingers on their right hand, representing the Holy Trinity, swears these words on the anniversary of the day that that oath was fulfilled with blood and with halberds and against 20,000 unruly, uncontrollable mercenaries that wanted nothing more than to kill that one man specifically. The Swiss Guard was reconstituted in 1548 under Pope Paul III, and has, again, operated continuously with brief interruptions here and there ever since. One of those interruptions came courtesy of Napoleon Bonaparte, who had approximately somewhere between 0 and no patience for any institution that represented authority that he didn't personally control. In 1798, French revolutionary forces occupied Rome. The French Revolution was a thing, you know. Napoleon was a small part in that, here and there. So when they got there, they changed the Vatican to the Roman Republic and arrested Pope Pius VI, who died in French captivity the following year. Not a good look. With the Pope dead, the Swiss Guard was disbanded. When Napoleon eventually allowed a new pope, which would be Pius VII, to be elected in 1800, the Guard was again reconstituted, but Napoleon's relationship with the papacy kind of deteriorated until he did something completely unheard of and arrested Pope Pius VII in 1809 and transported him to France as a prisoner. So that's how the Pope ended up in France. The Guard was again disbanded. Pius VII spent 5 years in French captivity before being released after the first time that Napoleon abdicated the throne in 1814. So now is a good time, I think, to hop in and talk about the Lion Monument in Lucerne, Switzerland. It's relevant because it's one of those things that you should really know exists. In August 1792, 6 years before Napoleon disbanded the Papal Guard, Swiss soldiers were defending the French royal family at the Tuileries Palace in Paris when the revolutionary mob stormed it. About 600 Swiss Guard died that day, protecting Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The king himself tried to prevent more bloodshed by ordering the Guard to stand down, and many of them died regardless. The survivors, on the other hand, were hunted through Paris in the days that followed. In Lucerne, carved directly into the sandstone cliff face, is a dying lion. It's massive. It's roughly 30 feet long. It's impaled by a spear. One of its paws is resting on a shield bearing the French royal lily. The other is resting on a shield bearing the Swiss cross. That's kind of difficult to describe, but for everybody watching on video, there will be a picture. Goethe saw it and called it the, quote, the saddest and most moving piece of rock in the world. Mark Twain saw it and called it, quote, the most mournful and moving piece of stone in the world. 2 different people, 2 different centuries, independently arriving at the same conclusion for this. The Lion Monument is not about the Vatican. It's about the French royal family. But it kind of commemorates the same thing. Swiss soldiers dying for an employer because the oath said to do so. Because that's just what they do. Because that's been the defining characteristic of this unit for 500 years. 1527, 1792, different centuries, different employers, same end. It's not a pattern that you can't recognize. It's cultural. It's just who these guys are. The Swiss Guard was permanently reconstituted in 1849 and has operated continuously since then. Commander Jules Ripond, who served from 1910 to 1921, reformed it back into something with actual military standards and also designed the current uniform, which almost everybody incorrectly attributes to Michelangelo. It's because it looks like something from then that everybody gives him credit for it. But it was this guy that came up with like, hey, stripes. Let's do stripes. Now, we're going to jump ahead just a touch. A very small period of time. May 13th, 1981, Pope John Paul II, PJP2, would be his street name, I believe, was moving through St. Peter's Square in an open-topped Pope mobile, which looks like the popper from the game Sorry, but without the popper part of it at this point. He's moving slowly enough for the crowd to reach out and touch him as he passes, which is normal. That's a normal thing that the Pope did, and still does, I believe, except maybe not so much in the Pope mobile anymore. And we're about to find out why. 23-year-old Turkish gunman named Mehmet Ali Agca pushed through the crowd, pulled a handgun, and fired. 2 bullets hit the Pope. One hit him in the stomach and passed within millimeters of any major organs, and the other struck his left hand. Again, divine intervention, I believe. The Pope collapsed into the arms of his secretary. 2 bystanders are also wounded in the gunfire, and the crowd explodes into chaos. Among the Swiss Guard assigned to the Pope mobile that day was a guard named Alois Esterman, who threw himself over the wounded Pope as security personnel scrambled to respond. So again, this man, this member of the Swiss Guard, is making himself a human shield for the Pope, like his predecessors did hundreds of years before this. He is willing to die for the Pope. The Pope obviously survived, because John Paul II, I don't think, died until like 2002-ish, I think. But he went through 5 hours of surgery, losing so much blood that surgeons later said that it was a miracle that he survived at all. Being the Pope, John Paul II later visited his attempted assassin in prison and personally forgave him for trying to kill him. Agca's connections ran through Turkish ultra-nationalist groups and potentially into like Bulgarian intelligence agencies, which pointed towards possible Soviet involvement. The CIA investigated it, and of course the CIA has never done anything creepy or weird, and they reached inconclusive findings. Whether the KGB ordered the assassination attempt of the Pope remains one of the unresolved questions of the Cold War, which again, I don't really know, because Russians are Eastern Orthodox. They're not Catholic, but I also don't know that they would hold enough ill will to want to kill someone who has essentially the same core beliefs as them like that. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. I could just be giving everybody the benefit of the doubt here. Hard to say. Esterman, who covered the Pope's body with his own in St. Peter's Square that afternoon, would go on to become one of the most decorated and trusted officers in the Swiss Guard's modern history, eventually becoming the commander. And we're going to come back to him here in a little bit. The assassination attempt of the Pope was the moment that the Vatican publicly acknowledged that the Swiss Guard in its current form was not adequate for modern threats. You don't want to bring a halberd to a gunfight. which they already did once, but that was a little different, you know? Agco had like walked through this crowd with a Browning high-power pistol and gotten close enough to the Pope to shoot him twice before he was stopped. The security failure is total. There's no, we could have stopped this one particular part of it, but maybe not this. This was everything failing at the same time, irrevocably. And I will give him credit. The Browning High Power is a fantastic handgun. It's an older model, but it checks out, you know. Matter of fact, that's not the first time we've talked about the Browning High Power, because when we did the Iranian embassy siege, the SAS guys were all packing Browning High Powers. They're so good. And you can't touch one for like less than $1,000 now, because they're harder to find and they're so damn good that when somebody gets one, they're not going to part with it. Guntism. So what follows this attempt on the Pope's life is a comprehensive reform of the Guard's capabilities and operational awareness and things like that. Now's where the counterterrorism training comes in. They're learning all of that stuff. They're learning tactical driving, becoming more proficient with modern firearms. Speaking of very well put together, very reliable firearms, the SIG P220 became the standard sidearm for the Swiss Guard. It was later supplemented to, in my opinion, as a Glock guy, the superior Glock 19. I could make the argument that the Glock 19 is probably the best, most reliable handgun on the planet. And I would argue that with anyone, actually, because even though I do not currently possess a Glock 19, I've switched over to a Glock 43X, which is just so nice. Any handgun that I can conceal in a t-shirt and you don't know that I have it, pretty sweet. I like that a lot. They would also get access to the SIG SG 550 rifle and the Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, which is also sweet. They're learning a lot of close protection protocols, personal protection tactics and weapons and all that. And they developed the plainclothes element of the Guard, which are officers who work in civilian clothing to blend into crowds during public appearances for the Pope. And that's a lot more important than a lot of the other things that I've just mentioned. So whereas you have like the Secret Service that protects the president and Congress and all these other guys, where they're in suits and ties with sunglasses, and you can look at that guy and go, Fed. This is just some dude in a polo shirt and shorts. Just looks like he's there to see, the man that stands between Catholics and God himself to talk to. And this guy's just got his Ray-Bans on, and like whatever he's wearing, just looking like a dude. Except he's not a dude. He's a Swiss Guardsman. They still have the Renaissance era uniforms for ceremony purposes. Then they also would add the modern killing capability to all of that as well. The halberds are real. They actually use those. Recruits are trained in their use. They're not purely decorative. They're also not just the primary weapon anymore. So now we're going to get into a part of the Guard's modern history that's not really talked about all that often. Alois Esterman, the man who used himself as a shield for Pope John Paul II after he'd been shot, was confirmed as the 31st commander of the Pontifical Swiss Guard on the afternoon of May 4th, 1998. A few hours later, at approximately 9 o'clock in the evening, a nun living in the apartment next to Esterman's heard some odd noises, some strange sounds. So she knocks on the door, and in the most, mystery movie thing of all time, as she knocks, the door opens and she looks inside. There's 3 bodies in the house. Esterman is shot in the face and shoulder. His Venezuelan wife, Gladys Romero, is shot in the torso. And 23-year-old Vice Corporal Cedric Tournay is shot in the head with a pistol nearby. The Vatican released its official version of the events before midnight. They investigated for about 3 hours and were like, oh, we know what happened here. Tournay had murdered Esterman and his wife in a fit of rage over being passed over for a medal that he thought he deserved. This medal is the Benemerenti medal, which is usually given after 3 years of satisfactory service. So you combine that with the fact that Esterman had also given him like an official disciplinary reprimand in his record. And so he went in there, killed Esterman, killed his wife, and then shot himself. Tournay's mother never accepted this version of the story. Most other independent researchers also don't agree with this version of the story. And here's where it gets a little interesting rather than where it would be sad, because we have 3 dead people. In 2004, Marcus Wolf made a claim. And to understand who Marcus Wolf was before I tell you what he said, because that actually matters, he was the head of the HVA, which is the foreign intelligence arm of the East German State Security, and the Stasi, with their underwear jars. This guy could probably be an episode in his own right. Matter of fact, he ran East German foreign intelligence for 30 years during the Cold War and is considered one of the most effective and efficient spy masters in the history of intelligence operations. His agency penetrated NATO at its highest levels. He recruited sources in the West German government, the military, the media, that shaped European politics for decades. When Marcus Wolf says that someone was a Stasi asset, this is not like a conspiracy theory from an unreliable source. This is a dude that knows where the bodies are buried. He knows who's who, because he is them. Wolf claimed that Alois Esterman, the most trusted Vatican insider, the man who shielded the Pope from an assassin's bullets, had been a Stasi informant since 1979. For nearly 20 years, while climbing the ranks of the Vatican's most trusted security unit, Esterman had allegedly been feeding information to East German intelligence agencies. So now we layer that against what we already know with the 1981 assassination attempt being possibly Soviet and Bulgarian intelligence backed. The CIA investigated the shooting and never came to a definitive ruling where they could rule out Soviet involvement. So if the Guard's most trusted officer was at the same time that and a Stasi asset, that's not just like a scandal. That's a potential intelligence operation running through the heart of papal security for 20 years. The Vatican invoked its sovereignty and conducted the investigation entirely on its own. No outside law enforcement, not even local. No independent autopsy reviews. No formal response to the allegations made by Wolf. The case is closed as a murder-suicide. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, later requested that the Vatican tribunals pay, quote, particular attention to Tournay's mother and her continued appeals that she's putting through, which implies that kind of even inside the Vatican, the official closure of this case isn't something that people are comfortable with, because they still think that there's probably something more to this than what meets the eye. So the case is then technically closed. Esterman's funeral is held in St. Peter's Basilica, which is the first time that that particular honor had been granted to a non-clergy member. The Guard moves on. They appoint a new commander. They continue doing what they've been doing for 519 years. Nobody has ever definitively answered whether he was a Stasi agent still or not. Nobody's ever explained what actually happened in his apartment on the night of May 4th, 1998. It just kind of sits in Vatican history unresolved next to all of the other things in the Vatican that we don't know about. The modern pontifical Swiss Guard is 135 men. To join, you have to be a Swiss citizen, you have to be male, you have to be Catholic, you have to be unmarried, you have to be between the ages of 19 and 30, and you have to be at least 5'8" tall. So, short kings need not apply. You have to have completed Swiss Army basic training, which I don't know if they add attachments to you that you can flip out when you need, like the toothpick or the tweezers or the corkscrew. Um, you also have to have a high school diploma. Pretty standard. You sign on for a minimum of 2 years, and you can serve up to 25 years before you are retired. You're paid approximately 1,500 euros per month, plus free housing and meals in Vatican City, which everyone acknowledges is fairly modest, and which everyone who serves accepts, because you don't do this for the money. You are in this for the love of the game. They guard the bronze doors at St. Peter's Basilica, which is the gates of Vatican City. During papal masses, they stand perfectly still in their Renaissance uniforms until the moment where until the moment of consecration, when they drop to one knee and incline their halberds in salute. During a conclave, which is the closed-door process when a new pope is elected, they seal the Sistine Chapel and guard the cardinals inside, ensuring total secrecy of this election. Every papal transition in the last 500 years has had Swiss guards at the doors. They've seen 42 popes come and go. The current pope, Leo XIV, was elected in May 2025, and he's the first American-born pope in history. Probably also the first White Sox fan in recorded history of the popes, too. They really missed out not being, like, fans of the Cardinals and the Padres, but I mean, all three teams are terrible. What am I talking about? They're all bad. New recruits swear their oath every May 6th in the courtyard of San Damiso in the palace. Each recruit places his left hand on the guard's banner and raises 3 fingers on his right to represent the Holy Trinity. They swear in German, French, Italian, or Romanish to serve the Pope faithfully and to sacrifice their life in his defense if necessary. The oath says sacrifice, not protect, not serve, sacrifice. And they swear it in on the anniversary of the morning 147 men made good on that exact promise. 519 years, 135 men, the smallest army in the world's smallest country, protecting an institution that has outlasted every empire that has ever tried to destroy it, and probably will. We went through the Landsknecht, who are some of the best fighters in medieval Europe, who stabled their horses in St. Peter's Basilica, which is incredibly disrespectful. They're dust. Charles V's Holy Roman Empire is gone. Napoleon's empire is gone. The Soviet Union is gone. The Swiss Guards still stand. So that was my rendition of the Swiss Guard and a very brief history. I really enjoyed looking into this episode because I got to learn a lot of things that I didn't know. Because up until I started this, when I thought Swiss Guard, I'm like, oh, it's those jack-offs in the goofy pants. No, they will kill you. If you look at the Pope cross-eyed, they're going to put you on a t-shirt. And they are going to do it very, very efficiently. So with that being said, if you want early access and backdoor access to a bunch of stuff, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you all of the access to all of the shows. $5 is not enough for what you get. There are different tiers that you can sign up for, but the minimum is $5, and my goodness, for $5, do you get a lot. You get access to History Goon, Macabre Emporium with David and Sarah, Guestnicity with Luther, 911 calls with the operator, which I'm just getting back into listening to that. And man, I remember why I had such a hard time in the first place, because I am such a pussy when it comes to 911 calls and hearing people like having the worst moment of their life. It kind of gets to me, I'm a little soft with stuff like that, but Sam does such a good job that you can't help but listen. And he never makes it feel like he's being disrespectful to anyone, which is incredible. He's very good at what he does. Um, you also get True Crime Tradies, our new Australian friends that watch true crime documentaries and use their whimsical accents to tell you about all the horrific shit that they're seeing. A lot of fun. Um, those are the kind of guys that, like, if I was Australian, I'd probably be working with them. We'd just be on job sites, just cussing and shit. It'd be a good time. Because believe it or not, I do the same thing for the most part that those guys are doing a lot of. But anyway, lot of good things coming out with 1159 Media. I'm also doing Patreon exclusive stuff, which you're not going to get one this week, but you're going to get one next time because I have to do it because the guy is such a piece of shit. But the side story that comes out of it is insane, to say the absolute least. Absolutely bonkers story. Russians are built different. I'll say that. So, also, I have a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You want to throw me a couple bucks? Awesome. That's great. If you don't, just spread the word. Tell people about my show. Go check it out on YouTube. I'm upwards of 100 subscribers now, which is awesome. I didn't ever expect to get that far, but thank you everybody for joining me. Thank you everybody for hopefully enjoying this episode and all the episodes that I've put out so far. And we are approaching my mid-season break. And by mid-season break, I mean I'm going to record a huge episode that may end up being 2 parts for one guy, taking a week off to go through my list for the second half of the season, which I've got the last 10 episodes like road mapped out. Of course, the pro wrestling trope of, cards subject to change is possible, but I know what episodes I'm doing. I just don't know what order I'm doing them in, except for the last one, because I mentioned it on Facebook that I've had it brought to my attention that I have not covered a woman on this show that wasn't a complete scumbag. So I'm going to cover a woman on this show that was a bad bitch, and I don't think she'd be upset with me saying that about her. And until then, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like the Swiss Guard. Thanks. Okay, love you. Bye.